Oh, you need a mic?
No, please. No, it's okay. You can adjust to it. Because we have a mic here. You want him to still use the mic. Yeah, he's on. Victor, is it okay like this?
Mic test, testing. Testing.
So this is you're likely to use this one, I think. No.
Oh, okay. That is people that are listening.
Jerry, why is it? Jerry. Come on the mic, please. Or you still coming up?
Concerned, and I'm sure you want one kind of clarification or the other from us. And being the biggest refiner, then have a strategic role to play. And I'm sure all of you must have been reading all sorts of things going on. So we need certain clarifications on this issue. And our friend, you know him very well, you've been speaking to him, and he's here to put all the records straight. And I have on my left, Esrum is the chief economist of Dangote Group. I mean, his presence here is quite timely. He monitors as he's moving like the speed of sound. So he's here to join us. It's Dr. Hassan. Hassan, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
So, and we'll meet our colleagues and our friends. So they'll be with us. Anytime we call them, they come, and they're so good, so friendly. So David, I'll hand over the mic to you for you to talk about the state of the business today. I don't want to call it the state of the nation.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for making the time at short notice. So David Bird, the MD of Dangote Refinery. We are living in quite unprecedented times. I think it's very clear with the global headlines of all that is going on in the Middle East, impacting not just the oil price, obviously also gas, LNG. In fact, LNG arguably has been impacted more severely than oil. But every input into the global oil and gas supply chain, including freight, insurance, banking, etc. So incredibly volatile times. I think if you just go back a week, oil was in sort of a stable range of the mid-60s, and now it touched $118, almost $120, almost doubled within a week. So it's very fair to say we are not immune from that. As both an independent refiner, a domestic refining industry, a global refining industry, is not immune from the shocks that have been endured worldwide. So what I want to say is that as Dangote Refinery, what are we doing? We are fully exposed to the international commodity market. That needs to be widely understood. We purchase, even under the Crude for Naira program, we purchase Nigerian crude from the Nigerian government at international benchmark-related prices. We then pay international freight rates and international insurance rates in order to bring that crude from the terminal to the refinery. That's about 30–35% of our crude intake, as I've mentioned in previous meetings. However, we're designed around Nigerian crude, so we actively seek additional Nigerian crude cargoes. We buy those on the open market in US dollars. Historically, that's often changed through multiple traders' hands before we get access to it. And all that does is add further costs and premium to purchasing those Nigerian barrels and processing them through Dangote Refinery. And then there's another element about sort of, again, that balance of 30–40% of our crude diet that we purchase on the open market, and we've processed a wide variety of crudes, predominantly West Texas, but also from as far afield as South America, Central America, and then obviously we look very closely at West African grades. So fully international, fully exposed in that regard. So I fully acknowledge the pain that is being suffered. We are seeing that. We are doing what we can to ensure that we minimize costs throughout our supply chain. However, our price input is crude at benchmark-related prices. Freight is benchmarked against freight rates. To put some of those numbers in perspective, I mentioned the crude oil, the Brent. You could go back a week and it was hovering in a stable range of the mid-60s. It's now 118. If you look at freight rates, it would cost us about $800,000 a day to bring crude on a tanker from a Nigerian terminal to our refinery. That's currently 3.5 million. 800,000 to 3.5 million. Incredible escalation in the freight rates. Now that would be no different if Nigeria did not have a domestic refining industry. And that is the message that we would like to get across. We are exposed to global commodity price movements. We understand the pain that incurs in our business and obviously throughout the economy to drive inflation and so forth. And that is being felt worldwide. Nigeria, with a domestic refining industry, is not immune to that. However, the benefit of having a domestic refining industry is supply security. What would be worse than $120 oil is no oil. And there are countries right now, developed and developing, without a domestic refining industry that are already rationing. They are already seeing panic buying. And heaven knows what will happen over the next 10 days, 2 weeks, as some of those countries with low supply security stocks start to endure significant shortages, because where are the molecules going to come from? This is both crude and refined products. Incredible disruption where the Middle East was a significant supplier of crude and refined products to the world, and that has now been curtailed. So where are those refined products going to come from? And you see a lot of self-interest in the way every country behaves. China has a huge refining industry, but predominantly dependent on Middle Eastern grades. And because now they're worried about their supply of crude, they have banned any exports. They have ensured that their domestic refining industry prioritizes the local market. So that is one thing that has fundamentally now changed with Nigeria. What is worse than $120 oil is no oil. And right now, Dangote Refinery, provided we continue to get access to Nigerian grades with the support of the Nigerian government and NNPC, albeit at internationally benchmarked prices, we will continue to process that oil and serve the domestic market with priority. And that is happening as we speak. There is uninterrupted supply to the Nigerian economy for all of its refined fuels requirements. That cannot be said for developed markets. You've seen panic buying in Australia, in the UK, queues at petrol stations, and developing markets who are also going to be quite hard hit. In fact, if not worse than developing markets, who will be potentially able to pay. But Bangladesh, Pakistan, etc., all seeing government intervention to ration supply and curtail demand purely because of an inability to secure the molecules. But with a domestic refining industry supported by the government, with the domestic crude production, Dangote Refinery will continue to meet all of Nigeria's refined fuels requirements. However, we are exposed to the global commodity pricing. So pricing is a discussion for government as a crude producer. But as an independent domestic refining industry, we will continue to ensure our operational continuity, and we will prioritize domestic supply and continue to ensure that Nigeria enjoys what it has enjoyed only for the last 18 months, 2 years, and that is fuel abundance and not fuel scarcity. Maintain our operational capability. We're operating at capacity. We're thrilled with our operational performance. After startup, a sustained period of operations since January 2024, we performed some maintenance to iron out some of these design and construction issues in December and January, and we have come out of that maintenance, and we are now at full capacity reliable and safe, and we will continue to ensure supply security to the Nigerian market for their fuels requirements. Thank you. To the 20%. So look, this is going to be dynamic. At any point in time, you can take a data point and say what is import parity pricing versus what is our absolute price. And so that's why I think it's important that I stress the risk management component, like month average pricing of crude. So we will try and bring price stability, as I mentioned at the last press conference. We want to first maintain supply security. That's our absolute commitment to the domestic market. As much as possible within a commercially acceptable range, we would like to bring price stability. And again, I remind the Christmas period. We put out a price on December 12th and we adjusted it 6 weeks later. In that period, oil went from $58 to $69. Right? So still a huge amount of volatility, plus or minus 15%, and we kept a stable price ex-gantry. So we will do that, try and maintain price stability, but within a commercially acceptable range as we see forecasts versus world events, et cetera, But right now, I don't think we've at all seen the end. I think there's still a degree of complacency in the oil market about the oil price, like what I mentioned about fuel scarcity in those countries that are import dependent. So I think this whole story has a long way to play out going forward. So when I say there was a point in time when we incurred 20%, we have incurred an incredible amount more than that when it comes to holding stocks and what's happened to the fluctuations when we tried to maintain safety stocks that we haven't been paid for. There's the risk management piece that I mentioned, where we have month average pricing of our primary inputs. And so forth. So price management is very active, it's very deliberate. We're committed to supply security, we're committed to price stability, but within a commercially acceptable range. So thank you. Not only for the crude for Naira, but also for the Nigerian crudes that we purchase on the spot market that go through multiple traders' hands. There are ways to take cost out of our supply chain. Absolutely there are. And that is a question for government. We continue to engage government. It is not the question of absolute price for crude is a role for government. There are other ways to support. You've seen Australia have provided energy bill rebates and so forth. So there are many ways to support an economy when it comes to inflation, particularly energy inflation. So I think that's very much a question for government. But for the avoidance of doubt, Dangote Refinery purchases 100% of its Nigerian crudes at international benchmarks. A component is in Naira based, but that's again FX and international benchmarks related, and there's a portion at international benchmarks through traders at US dollars. No discount, no subsidy, no alleviation from all of the cost burden. And then you add to that the freight that I mentioned before. So we're actively engaging with the government, whether they choose to do that. We would take it first and foremost for Dangote Refinery to meet our objective of ensuring supply security to the country. We would like assurance that we are continue to get flows of crude oil, Nigerian crude oil. We would also request that we get the grades that we request for, because all of the Nigerian grades are different. Right now, we feel like we are a little bit the customer of last resort. On a monthly basis, as we enact the Crude for Naira program, we submit our grade preferences, right? Every Nigerian grade is different. Escravos is different to Bonny Light, it's different to Otopadu. We put forward our preferences and we rarely get our preferences. So that's number one. Secure, so getting the volumes and getting the grades that we prefer. And then price, I think, is really a question for the government and how they want to support the economy or not. But our commitment is we will process that crude and we'll prioritize domestic supply of high-quality fuels.
Yasmin from AMT as well.
Let's be clear what's been taken off the market. You hear sort of commonly 20%, right? The Middle East is 20% of the crude supply, not that dissimilar also in the refined products. That is a massive curtailment of market supply. And Nigeria producing 1.5, growing a bit more hopefully. If you put 1.5, that's really 1% of between 1 and 2% of the total supply. So I think the opportunity to impact global dynamics right now, where there's a curtailment of 20% with Nigeria's ability to grow from a low base of 1.5% of total supply, is minimal. However, all countries are being very self-interested. China has banned exports. In fact, many countries with a refining industry have banned exports, Thailand, Vietnam, etc. Other countries that have a strategic reserve are releasing their strategic reserve. But bear in mind, they won't be releasing that on the open market. They'll be releasing those strategic reserves to ensure that their domestic industry gets preference. That is the role that the Nigerian government should be considering right now, self-interest. So what does that mean for Nigeria? That means ensuring that the domestic refining industry in Nigeria gets access to crude, abundant access to crude, the right grades of crude, prioritize the domestic industry. I would also advocate that all government agencies look at their contribution to taking cost out of the value chain. We still feel there's a lot of regulatory impost at every step of our processing, whether that's regulator, whether it's MPA, whether it's NIMASA, all of these. We have 47 different government agencies that we deal with and we incur costs from. I think there's a role for every government agency to really look hard at what's their contribution to take cost out of the supply chain. But most importantly, the role of Nigeria is to look after Nigerians, and that would be securing ample crude supply to Nigeria's domestic refining industry. That's less of an issue. We put forward every month. We have there's a whole raft of the grades, but we love Bonnet Light, we love Escravos. There's a list in there. The priority, I feel, is just more that engagement to the domestic refining industry, that they are seen as customers of first preference rather than customers of last resort. And we just don't understand the dynamics that are preventing that. Are some of these grades, we fully understand that some of them have certain commitments in place with international operators, etc. So fully acknowledging that. It's just trying to be transparent on the allocation method and where we sit in that pecking order, and which grades have, what are the constraints being faced by NNPC to allocate those grades to the domestic refining industry rather than being allocated to international traders. Because the ones we ask for, we then find are coming back on the market through an international trader. That's what's disappointing, right? Why can we not get, so it's less about the individual grade and more understanding the methodology being used by the government and NNPC to allocate those grades, such that we are prioritized under the Crude for Naira program to the domestic industry before it gets sold to an outfit in Geneva, who then take their cut and then sell it back to us.
What is the volume of crude that you work on?
Yeah, and so then on volume. So right now we get an allocation of 5. So we deal in Suezmax, let's say 950 million barrel cargoes. We get 5. We could easily get 13 or more. So that's the potential that we have been in discussions with the government about. There's no reason not to be seen as more than doubling our current allocation of crudes. And see the curves. So it is extraordinary what is happening now in middle distillates. So that's jet and diesel. So surprisingly, gasoline has been resilient and it's just moved with the crude price. So it's gone up in absolute terms, but the spread of crude to gasoline actually hasn't increased as much as we would have expected. However, diesel and jet, what traditionally would be a spread of, let's say, $20, $30 of jet is now over 100. Right, so jet and diesel. What's driven that? You can ask any market speculator. It's been a cold winter. There have been historically low stocks going into winter. Middle distillates are typically the heating oils, etc. There's fuel switching. So LNG, that's why I say we're not immune either from the LNG business. With Qatar, 20% of the world's supply of LNG shut down. So LNG now has gone through the roof. So countries that have power generation dependent on LNG are now switching to diesel. So fuel switching also impacts. So all of these factors are myriad and complex and impossible to predict. But right now it's the middle distillates that have really gone through the roof from a refining spread.
And just a quick follow-up. Where do you see most of this demand coming from? Africa, Southeast Asia, where?
So just to be clear, demand hasn't changed. I mean, Northern Hemisphere drives heating oil and now fuel switching in some countries from out of LNG, but I mean, it's material, but it's not about a fundamental demand change. This is a supply-driven shock. This is supply-driven volatility, not demand-driven. So this is all about the curtailment of crude oil to refining, and then refining knock-on. So both refining in the Middle East and refining in those countries that are dependent on Middle East crude, like Asia. So Asia's very much feeling the impacts of it.
Okay. Good afternoon. Yeah, so Jamal Ojo from RIS News. I guess this is an opportunity to dispel what is fake and tell us what's real. Over the weekend, there's been reports that Dangote shut down, stopped lifting. I believe you sort of addressed that, but you could be frontal with that. And the reason is because of an adjustment in pricing. So basically, at this point in the moment, what's the gantry price?
Have we announced the gantry pricing? Have we announced the gantry price yet? No. So on the gantry price, that will come out price movement. So we have paused loadings as of midnight, and we're updating the system to the new gantry price as a result of oil spiking $30 in the last 24 hours. So there is a new gantry price. Gantry loadings will commence immediately upon system upload. So dispelling myths, Dangote Refinery is fully open for business. If you want to come and lift, the truck gantry is ready and available. We will prioritize the domestic market for supply security on the back of acknowledging that we are exposed to a global commodity and we are not immune as a domestic refining industry that secures its crude on international benchmarks. We are not immune from those price movements, those commodity movements.
Hi, my name is Anthony.
Announced the performance test run. So as you move from construction to operations, it's very important. There's a methodology the insurance market requires, the finance market. So we had a performance test run, very rigorous performance test run that is independently signed off by the licensor at capacity. And we went public when we achieved that on the CDU and the and what we call the MS block, motor spirit block. So we are running at capacity. We are running at 650,000 barrels a day. In fact, we did the performance test run at 661,000 barrels a day. To get to 700,000, we had to first assure our insurance market and our other stakeholders. However, we see good room to move to 700, and we will go in a very deliberate management of change. We're confident we can creep that up to 700,000. But right now, for the purposes of full transparency, we are operating at nameplate capacity of 650,000 barrels a day, yeah, across the entire facility. So what does that mean? Now, I know there's been a lot of speculation on PMS, on gasoline. So as we mentioned in the last press conference, we are a merchant refinery. There's been significant pre-investment in the capability to produce octane. So through the vision of Aliko Dangote, a lot of investment in upgrading every molecule possible into octane. We are long in octane. That gives us the ability to blend and generate more PMS. So we can meet whatever the country requires. It started that we think the country demand is 35 million litres. We can easily meet 35 million litres. On crude, pure crude processing capability, we're at 50 to 55 million litres a day. Then we're very long in octane. Then we would be selling our octane as a component to other markets. If we don't, and we choose to import intermediates and blending components, we can easily achieve 65, 75 million litres. Yeah, frankly, double. Typically, in most merchant refineries, you can double your gasoline production. So we're very long in octane. That gives us the ability to make more octane. We can meet whatever the country requires. There's this endless debate about what is the true country requirement. There has been and will continue to be fuel abundance in Nigeria. And that has been sustained over this period. So as we saw during December and January, we're ratably lifting 45, 50 million litres a day. And we did that when we had a period of maintenance inside the facility. And right now we're operating at nameplate. Just yesterday we evacuated 120 million litres through both gantry and a 100,000-ton vessel. So the supply is there. We'll continue to supply. We have the logistics to continue to support huge volumes, both through the truck gantry and through vessel. There is no reason, though, not to come and lift from the gantry. And that's another point of I think, clarification. We have nothing against coastal. It's not about coastal. We see no reason why the Nigerian consumer should incur unnecessary cost to put PMS on a ship, take it a couple of kilometers up the road, discharge it into a depot, store it there, and then have a truck lift, when they could drive that truck 10, 15, 20 kilometers down the road and lift directly from the refinery. Our issue is double handling. It is not coastal versus truck. Our issue is double handling in the vicinity of the refinery. There is no reason that trucks now should be picking up from all of these legacy terminals in the vicinity of the refinery. That's the reality that has changed on the ground. A lot of efficiency could be brought by retailers and marketers and distributors in the vicinity of the refinery, and that's a huge radius, coming and picking up directly from the refinery. We've got a huge gantry to do that. We have invested in road infrastructure to achieve that. The Lagos state government has injected and invested in road infrastructure to achieve that. There is no reason product in the vicinity of the refinery, Lagos and so forth, should be double handled through another terminal nearby. Thank you.